Adrian's hand froze above Lucien Cross's photograph, gentler than it had ever been above mine. The silver frame rested between unopened invitations on our dining table, catching the amber light from the chandelier. Beyond the windows, traffic hissed over wet pavement 40 floors below. I stood beside Adrian with his coffee in one hand and the guest list for Saturday's charity auction in the other, waiting for him to notice either one. His thumb brushed dust from Lucien's face. "Where did you find this?" he asked. His voice had lost the clipped edge he used in boardrooms, and, lately, with me. "Inside the auction archives," I said. Cross sponsored the restoration program before he left the city. Adrian looked younger when he heard that name. Not happier exactly, but unguarded. The tension vanished from his jaw. His cedar scent warmed the air, carrying a softness I remembered from the first year of our marriage, when he still reached for me in his sleep. "He always believed damaged things deserved another chance," Adrian murmured. The coffee cooled against my palm. I had spent 6 weeks assembling the auction after Adrian's assistant resigned, calling donors between my own restoration commissions and sleeping 4 hours a night. That morning, I had repaired the torn lining of his tuxedo because he disliked strangers handling his clothes. Yet when he finally looked at me, he only glanced at the papers. "You confirmed the security arrangements?" "Yesterday." "The press restrictions?" "Signed this afternoon." "And my speech?" I tapped the blue folder beneath the photograph. "Edited, printed, and loaded onto your tablet." Adrian nodded as if these things had completed themselves. Then his phone lit up. Lucien Cross. The name glowed across the black screen, and Adrian answered before the second vibration. "Lucien." That single word was almost a caress. He turned toward the window, leaving me reflected behind him in the glass. Lucien's voice was too faint to distinguish, but Adrian listened without interrupting. He never listened to silence that carefully when it belonged to me. "Of course you can attend," he said. "You don't need to ask." I set his coffee beside the silver frame. Porcelain clicked against marble, sharp enough to make him glance back. "Julian will add you," he continued. "He handles everything." Handles everything. The phrase settled between my ribs with the neatness of a blade returned to its case. Adrian ended the call and handed me his phone. "Send Lucien the private entrance details. Crowds overwhelm him. Those details are restricted. Make an exception. You declined one for me last winter." Adrian's brows drew together. "That was different. You know how to manage yourself." The refrigerator hummed behind us. Rain tapped the windows. I watched a bead of coffee slide down the cup and darken the linen coaster I had embroidered with our initials. Adrian picked up Lucien's photograph again, studying it while I remained close enough to touch. "He had no one back then," he said. "Neither did I," I replied. Adrian did not seem to hear me. He walked toward his study with the frame under his arm, already asking whether Lucien still preferred white roses. I stayed beside the table until the chandelier's warmth became uncomfortable against my face. Then I opened the guest list and typed Lucien Cross into the place beside Adrian's name. My own seat had been assigned across the ballroom. I could have changed it. Instead, I confirmed the arrangement and closed the file. For the first time, I wondered what Adrian would do if Lucien and I ever needed him at the same moment. Crystal pendants trembled beneath the ballroom chandeliers as the auctioneer's gavel struck the podium, and applause rolled through the room beneath the bright notes of a string quartet. Beeswax, champagne, and white roses scented the heated air. From my station beside the final restored canvas, I watched Adrian lean toward Lucien Cross at the table across from mine. Lucien said something I could not hear. Adrian's expression softened before he answered, his hand resting briefly against Lucien's chair. Then the fire alarm screamed. The quartet stopped mid-note. A ribbon of black smoke poured through the service doors, followed by a blast of heat that sent guests surging toward the exits. "Move to the east doors," I called, pulling the emergency release beneath the display wall. The steel shutters rose halfway before the power failed, leaving a narrow opening. I pushed 2 volunteers through, then an elderly donor. Somewhere behind me, glass burst with a sharp crack. A lighting truss collapsed across the central aisle, scattering sparks over the carpet and cutting Lucien off from the exit. "Adrian!" Lucien shouted. I climbed over a fallen chair and reached him first. Smoke clawed at my throat as I seized his wrist and dragged him toward the gap beneath the shutter. A burning section of drapery dropped between us. I shoved Lucien clear, but the brass support struck my shoulder and drove me to one knee. Pain flashed down my arm. Through the orange haze, Adrian appeared beyond the overturned tables. His jacket was gone, his white shirt gray with ash. His gaze found Lucien behind me, then landed on me. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. I was close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. "Adrian," I managed. Lucien coughed and reached past my shoulder. "I can't breathe." Adrian ran toward us. Hope rose with the sound of his shoes striking marble, until he passed within inches of my outstretched hand. His sleeve brushed my fingers. He did not stop. He wrapped one arm around Lucien's waist, pulled Lucien against his chest, and carried him toward the narrow opening while I remained pinned beneath the hot metal support. "Adrian!" My voice vanished beneath the alarms. He looked back once. Firelight moved across his face, but Lucien sagged against him, and Adrian turned away. The shutter groaned as they disappeared beneath it. A firefighter in a yellow coat forced through the smoke moments later, his oxygen mask reflecting the flames. "I've got you," he said. He braced the support with a pry bar, hauled it high enough to free my shoulder, and dragged me across the floor as the ceiling fixtures crashed behind us. Cold rain struck my face outside. Sirens painted the wet pavement red and blue, smoke rolled above the hotel in dense, bitter clouds. Paramedics lowered Lucien onto a stretcher while Adrian stood beside him, one hand locked around Lucien's. I lay 20 feet away beneath a silver emergency blanket, my injured arm strapped against my chest. Adrian finally turned when a paramedic called my name. Our eyes met across the flashing lights. His mouth opened, but no sound crossed the distance. The question I had carried into the ballroom had been answered. Now another waited in its place. What was left of a marriage after one husband watched the other choose someone else? Antiseptic and burned fabric clung to the hospital air, sharp beneath the steady hiss of oxygen from the next bed. Fluorescent light spilled across the white tile as I watched a nurse tighten the sling around my shoulder, her fingers careful against skin still warm from the fire. "The doctor wants you resting for 6 weeks, she said. "No lifting. No restoration work until you're cleared." I signed the discharge instructions with my left hand. The letters leaned awkwardly, but the pen never shook. When the door clicked shut, Adrian stepped away from the window. Soot darkened the collar of his dress shirt, and rain had dried in pale streaks across his sleeves. He had changed nothing since the ballroom, not even the faint cedar scent that used to settle my breathing whenever he entered a room. Now it reached me through the medicinal chill and did nothing. "Lucien inhaled more smoke than they thought," he said. "His lungs were already compromised. That's why I took him first." He placed my wedding band on the bedside table. Someone had removed it before the scans, and the platinum caught a hard stripe of fluorescent light. "You were conscious. You were directing people toward the exit." Lucien couldn't breathe. I looked at the ring instead of him. "You saw the truss on my shoulder." Adrian's jaw tightened. The monitor behind the curtain next door marked several mechanical beats before he answered. I saw it. And you saw my hand. His gaze dropped to my bandaged fingers. Yes. The room offered him nowhere to hide, no boardroom table, no assistant, no urgent call. Only the muted rattle of a supply cart in the hallway and the cold truth between us. He pulled the visitor's chair closer, its metal legs scraping across the floor. I made a judgment under pressure. Fire crews were coming in. I knew someone would reach you. You didn't know. Julian, did Lucien ask about me? The question stopped him. A muscle moved near his temple. He was disoriented. That wasn't my question. Adrian crossed to the sink and filled a paper cup, though I had not asked for water. The thin rim bent beneath his grip. He asked whether you got out. After you told him I had. Adrian set the untouched cup beside the ring. I'm trying to explain what happened. No. You're explaining why your choice should hurt me less. My voice remained level, quiet enough that the nurses outside kept walking. I expected something to rise then, anger, grief, the old instinct to soften my words before they wounded him. Nothing came. Adrian reached for my uninjured hand. His palm was warm, familiar in every line, and his cedar scent deepened with his distress. For years, that warmth had meant home. I withdrew before his fingers closed around mine. He stared at the empty space between us. Don't, I said. I'm your husband. The words came too quickly, as if the title could repair what his body had already confessed in the smoke. I swung my feet to the floor and stood without accepting his help. Pain pulled beneath the sling, bright and immediate, but it belonged to me, I could navigate it. Adrian moved to block the door, then stopped when I looked at him. For the first time, he seemed uncertain whether he still had the right. Tell me what you need, he said. I lifted the wedding band from the table and closed it inside my fist. The metal felt cold against my palm. Tonight, I need you not to come home. His face changed by fractions, lips parting, shoulders going rigid, one hand curling at his side. Julian, we should not make decisions while you're in shock. I opened the door. Warm hallway air moved over my skin, carrying coffee, floor wax, and the distant chime of an elevator. That's the problem, Adrian. I met his eyes without tears, without accusation, without the smallest need for him to understand. I don't think I am. The elevator doors opened at the end of the corridor. As I walked toward them alone, his scent faded behind me, and my pulse never once asked me to turn back. Morning rain traced silver lines down the hospital windows while the discharge printer clicked behind the nurse's station. By 9, my left arm rested in a black sling, my prescriptions were sealed inside a paper bag, and Adrian was waiting beside the elevator with my coat folded over one arm. The car is downstairs, he said. I'm not going with you. The fluorescent light sharpened the sleepless shadows beneath his eyes. His cedar scent reached me, familiar but inert, like perfume left on an empty shirt. Then I'll follow your cab. No, I signed the final form against the cool laminate counter. Go to work, Adrian. I took a cab to the apartment we had shared for 6 years. Rain hissed beneath the tires, and the city passed in wet gray panes. When I arrived, Adrian was already there. He must have used the company car. He stood in our living room with his tie loosened, framed by pale window light and the low hum of the climate system. My suitcase lay open on the bed. Packing one-handed made every small task awkward, hangers scraped along the closet rod, zippers caught beneath my fingers, and pain flashed hot beneath the sling whenever I reached too far. Adrian stepped forward. Let me. I moved between him and the suitcase. Don't touch my things. The sentence stopped him more effectively than a shout. I packed clothing, medication, restoration tools, and the sketchbooks I had kept behind winter blankets because Adrian preferred the apartment uncluttered. I left the crystal glasses, the monogrammed towels, and every photograph selected to make us look effortless. "Where will you stay?" he asked. "Somewhere else." "For how long?" I placed my wedding ring on the marble nightstand. It made a small, clean sound against the stone. Adrian stared at it as though something heavier had fallen. "Put it back on," he said, too softly to be in order. "We can take a few days. We can speak to someone. You don't have to turn one terrible decision into, I waited for you in restaurants while meetings ran late. I cancelled exhibitions when they threatened your image. I learned which silences kept this home peaceful. I closed the suitcase. That was waiting. This isn't." His fingers curled around the edge of the dresser. "You're leaving because I saved him first. I'm leaving because you still think the fire created the distance between us." Outside, rain struck the glass in hard, uneven bursts. Adrian looked from the ring to the half-empty closet, finally seeing that I had not packed to frighten him into following. I had packed to go. Downstairs, the doorman loaded my suitcase into another cab. Adrian came as far as the revolving doors but did not cross the brass threshold. Cold rain blew beneath the awning, carrying the smell of pavement and exhaust. "Julian," he called, "what am I supposed to do now?" I settled into the back seat and lowered the window 3 inches. "For once, don't wait for me to tell you." The cab pulled away. Through the rain-streaked rear window, Adrian remained beneath the awning, motionless and empty-handed. For years, he had mistaken my staying for proof that I always would. By the time he understood the difference between silence and forgiveness, the apartment key was already on the seat beside me, and I had no intention of using it again. The radiator in the rented room knocked twice before dawn, sending dry heat across stacked canvases and the suitcase I had not yet unpacked. My phone vibrated against the wooden floor, its blue light cutting through the gray apartment. Adrian's attorney had sent a settlement agreement, a private security contract, and a message stating that both could be activated before noon. I read every page at the narrow kitchen counter while traffic hissed over wet pavement 6 floors below. The settlement was generous enough to buy silence without naming it. The security arrangement was worse. Its agents would report my movements to Adrian's office, for continuity of care. I signed only the acknowledgement of receipt, then wrote beneath it, "I decline all compensation and protection. Do not contact me through his company again." At 9, I entered my restoration studio for the first time since the fire. The air smelled of linen, rabbit skin glue, and mineral spirits. Winter light poured through the north-facing windows, revealing dust suspended above my worktable. My shoulder protested when I lifted a magnifying lamp, but I adjusted the sling and opened the email I had avoided for 3 weeks. The Uffizi-affiliated conservation workshop in Florence had offered me a 12-month position restoring a damaged Renaissance altarpiece. Before, I had drafted a refusal because Adrian's board disliked the idea of a CEO's Omega husband living abroad. That version still waited in my drafts, polished and obedient. I deleted it. Then I typed, "I accept." The reply arrived before the kettle finished whistling. They wanted me in Florence in 12 days. By afternoon, Adrian stood outside the studio's glass door, his charcoal coat darkened by sleet. I let him in, but did not offer coffee. "The attorney said you refused everything." His voice sounded rough against the quiet scrape of my palette knife. "Yes. The fire investigation isn't finished. You shouldn't be alone. Your guards wouldn't protect me. They would keep me visible to you." He placed both palms on the steel table, close enough for his cedar scent to reach me. My hands continued separating yellowed varnish from a painted sky. "Then tell me what you need." "A signature." I slid the Florence employment forms toward him. One clause required acknowledgement from a spouse because my health insurance remained attached to Adrian's corporate plan until our legal status changed. His gaze stopped on the departure date. You're leaving the country. I'm taking a job. With one usable arm. The conservators know about my injury. Unlike you, they asked what I could still do. The fluorescent tubes hummed overhead. Adrian picked up the pen, but his fingers tightened until the metal clip pressed white against his skin. If I sign this, you'll go. If you don't, I'll purchase my own coverage and go anyway. For once, the decision was not waiting in his hands. He signed. After he left, I unlocked the flat cabinet beneath my drafting table. Inside lay 6 paintings I had hidden before our wedding, scarred frames, empty dining chairs, omega figures with gold seams running through their bodies. Adrian's advisors had called them too intimate, too angry, too likely to invite questions about our marriage. I carried each canvas into the gallery room despite the pull in my shoulder. The walls were cold beneath my fingertips, track lights clicked on one by one, turning the concealed work into something impossible to dismiss. At 6, I uploaded the collection under my full professional name and announced a public exhibition in Florence. Within minutes, invitations and interview requests began filling the screen. Adrian called once. I let it ring until the studio fell silent again. Then a message appeared from the Florence curator: one of the paintings has already been requested for the opening. Will you allow us to display the piece titled The Man Who Looked Past Me? I stared at the canvas nearest the window, where a faceless figure reached toward someone beyond the frame. This time, I did not ask whose reputation the truth might damage. I pressed approve, and the hidden life Adrian had expected me to preserve became the first thing Florence would see. The phone vibrated across the steel work table at 11:47 p.m., rattling against a jar of clouded varnish. Cold rain tapped the studio skylight, and the sharp scent of solvent lingered beneath the track lights. I expected another call from Adrian. Instead, Lucien Cross's name glowed on the screen. You should answer, Adrian said from the doorway. Water darkened the shoulders of his coat. In one hand, he held his phone, in the other, a thin envelope bent beneath the pressure of his fingers. I set down my brush. Why are you here? Adrian crossed the concrete floor and placed his phone beside mine. A voice recording was already open. Because Lucien sent me this. He pressed play. Lucien's voice spilled through the studio, weak enough to sound intimate, each breath carefully uneven. He reminded Adrian of the restoration program fire years ago, when Adrian had failed to reach him before smoke filled the stairwell. He spoke of waking alone, of waiting for footsteps that never came, of believing Adrian would abandon him again. Then his tone changed. If you ever have to choose, choose me this time. The recording ended with the faint hiss of hospital oxygen. Adrian opened the envelope. Inside were printed messages from the months before the auction, Lucien invoking that old fire whenever Adrian tried to set boundaries, praising his loyalty, then questioning whether guilt had made him cowardly. He knew exactly what to say, Adrian murmured. Amber light caught the sleepless red in his eyes. He built that night before it happened. I slid the pages back across the table. Their edges rasped over the metal. What do you want from me? I want you to understand that he manipulated me. Adrian stepped closer, cedar cutting through the solvent fumes. Once, that scent could loosen every knot beneath my ribs. Now it was only cedar. I was carrying something I thought I owed him, he said. He used it. Yes. The answer stopped him. Rainwater fell from his cuff and struck the floor between us. Lucien used your guilt, I continued. He wanted access to you, and he found the wound that opened the door. Adrian's shoulders lowered by half an inch. Then you see, I see what he did. I turned the nearest canvas toward the light. The faceless figure in the man who looked past me reached beyond the frame, his painted hand suspended over someone invisible. But Lucien did not move your legs in that ballroom. He did not turn your head away from me. He did not make you run past my hand. The ventilation system hummed above us. Adrian looked at the painting, then at the sling supporting my shoulder. I thought the firefighters would reach you. That was the calculation you made after choosing him. His mouth opened, but no sound followed. I took his phone, stopped the recording from replaying, and placed it inside his palm. You were manipulated before the fire. During it, you were free. His fingers closed slowly around the device. And I chose him. The words came out stripped of defense. I nodded once. Adrian sank onto the wooden stool beside the worktable. It creaked beneath him, a small domestic sound in a room that no longer belonged to our marriage. Tell me what I can do. Stop asking me to turn your guilt into instructions. I unlocked my studio door and held it open. Cool air swept in, carrying wet pavement and exhaust from the street below. Adrian rose without arguing. At the threshold, he paused beneath the blue security light. Lucien used me, he said, facing the rain. But I left you there. This time, the confession belonged entirely to him. Then his phone chimed. A preview appeared across the screen. The fire department's incident report was ready for release, including witness statements from inside the ballroom. Adrian stared at the notification. Somewhere within those pages waited an account of the minutes neither of us could fully remember, and whatever it contained would have to survive the truth he had finally spoken. Rain hissed against the studio windows as the report opened beneath the cold glow of Adrian's phone. He had already stepped into the hallway, but I stopped him before the elevator arrived. Send it to me. The doors opened with a soft chime. Adrian forwarded the file without turning back, then disappeared behind brushed steel. Minutes later, the blue-white light of my monitor washed over jars of varnish and rows of sable brushes. The report smelled faintly of nothing, yet every page seemed to carry smoke. I expected measurements, evacuation times, and the clinical language officials used to contain disaster. Instead, the first witness statement placed me somewhere I had no memory of being. A catering supervisor had seen Lucien near the East Service corridor, trapped behind a jammed fire door as smoke rolled beneath the ceiling. According to her, I was already moving toward the ballroom exit when I heard him coughing. I turned around. The next account came from a firefighter whose helmet camera had recorded the corridor in fractured bursts, amber emergency lights, black smoke, water shining across the marble. At 9:18 p.m., the footage showed me gripping the warped release bar with my uninjured arm while Lucien struck the other side. The metal refused to move. I seized a brass stanchion, drove its base into the mechanism twice, and forced the door open wide enough for him to crawl through. The video had no clear dialogue, only alarms and the roar of the sprinkler system, but Lucien's hand closed around my wrist before I pointed him toward the ballroom. He ran. I went back for a security guard calling from behind a fallen display wall. That was where the lighting truss came down. My shoulder tightened inside the sling as the footage froze on a grainy image of me beneath the emergency lights, one hand extended through the smoke. Adrian had been standing less than 30 feet away. I sent him the timestamp. No message accompanied it. His reply arrived before the video ended. Where are you? The studio door opened 12 minutes later, bringing in damp air and the sharp scent of rain on wool. Adrian stopped beside the worktable. Water slipped from his coat cuff and struck the concrete floor one drop at a time. I rotated the monitor toward him and pressed play. He watched me break open the fire door. He watched Lucien stumble free because I had chosen to turn back. Then he watched his own figure enter the camera's edge, cross the ballroom, and reach Lucien while I remained pinned beneath steel. Adrian braced both palms against the table. The wood gave a low creak. You saved him. Yes. The word came easily, though I could not remember doing it. His reflection trembled in the dark portion of the screen. And I ran past you to save the man you'd already saved. I closed the file. The sudden silence left only rain tapping the glass and the faint electrical hum of the restoration lamps. Adrian reached for the back of a chair, missed it, then let his hand fall. The board will bury this if Lucien asks them to. His foundation funded the auction. Then decide whether you're still the man who protects him. Adrian lifted his eyes to mine. For the first time, there was no explanation waiting behind them. No old guilt. No Lucien. Only the full shape of what he had done. I took the report's release authorization from the printer, signed beside my name, and pushed it across the table. The evidence could now enter the public record with my consent. Adrian stared at the signature as if it were a door locking behind him. By morning, the board would demand silence, Lucien would demand protection, and Adrian would have to choose again, this time with no smoke to hide inside. The boardroom's recessed lights bleached every face around the black glass table, while the ventilation system whispered cold air carrying the bitter scent of untouched coffee. At 8:03 a.m., 12 phones vibrated almost simultaneously as Julian's authorization released the fire report and helmet camera footage to the public record. Adrian sat at the head of the table, a sealed evidence envelope beneath his palm. Lucien Cross occupied the chair nearest the window, immaculate in charcoal wool, his fingers motionless beside a silver pen. Withdraw the footage, the board chair said. Issue a statement that trauma compromised Julian's recollection, and we may contain this before the markets open. Lucien leaned forward. You owe me the chance to explain. Adrian looked at him, then at the paused image on the wall monitor, Julian disappearing back into smoke after freeing the jammed door. You already explained enough. Lucien's composure cracked at the edges. Those messages were private. They were coercion. Adrian opened the envelope. Printed transcripts slid across the glass with a dry rasp, followed by the original audio drive and the company's correspondence with Lucien's foundation. Corporate counsel has authenticated everything. I've delivered duplicate copies to the fire investigator and the district attorney's office. Chairs shifted. The board chair's voice hardened. As CEO, you had no authority to expose the company without approval. Adrian removed his access badge and placed it beside the evidence. The plastic clicked once against the table. Then you no longer have a CEO to restrain. He signed the resignation waiting on his tablet, surrendered his voting proxy, and declined the severance agreement pushed toward him. By the time he stood, security had disabled his executive credentials. His name vanished from the monitor beneath the company seal, leaving an empty line where his title had been. Lucien blocked the door. You're destroying everything over a husband who has already left you. Adrian stopped close enough to smell Lucien's sharp cedar cologne, once familiar, now cloying beneath the recycled air. No. I destroyed my marriage when I chose you. This is only the bill arriving. Security escorted Lucien toward counsel as camera shutters began rattling beyond the frosted doors. Adrian walked out through another corridor carrying nothing, not his laptop, not his company phone, not even the framed photograph from his office. Across the city, afternoon sun warmed the brass handle of Julian's attorney's office. I turned the divorce papers beneath my right hand while my injured shoulder pulled stiffly against its sling. Adrian entered without an assistant, his tailored coat damp at the collar and the pale strip where his badge had hung visible against his shirt. I resigned, he said. The evidence is with the authorities. Lucien can't use my company to bury it. I read the final page once more. Good. His shoes stopped on the edge of the cream rug. I'm not asking you to forgive me. Then don't make your confession into another request. The fountain pen felt cool and ridged between my fingers. I signed Julian Vale beneath the dissolution clause, dated it, and slid the papers to my attorney. Adrian's hand tightened at his side, but he did not reach across the desk. The sacrifice had cost him his title, his influence, and the future he had built around them. It had not purchased me. Outside, courthouse bells struck 4 as my attorney sealed the filing envelope. Adrian stepped aside when I rose, leaving the doorway clear. Florence waited in 6 weeks, the divorce could become final before my exhibition opened. The only question left was whether Adrian could accept the consequence he had finally chosen without turning his remorse into one more chain around my freedom. Rain silvered the Florentine pavement, turning the street outside Julian Vale's gallery into a mirror of white awnings and amber lamps. Inside, warm air carried the clean bite of fresh paint, old canvas, and chilled prosecco while guests gathered beneath the exhibition's black-lettered name, "Nothing Anymore." Julian stood across the street beneath the stone arcade, one hand wrapped around a portfolio case, watching a delivery van reverse toward the gallery entrance. Its warning beeps cut through the rain. Then came the snap of metal. A steel display frame slipped from the van's hydraulic lift and skidded across the wet pavement toward him. Someone shouted. Julian turned, but the portfolio strap had twisted around the iron leg of a cafe chair. Before he could wrench it free, Adrian hit him from the side. They landed beneath the arcade as the frame crashed where Julian had been standing, scattering glass across the cobblestones with a sound like breaking ice. Cold water soaked Julian's sleeve. Adrian's palm scraped against the stone, but he shifted away at once, leaving space between them. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rougher than Julian remembered. A year without tailored authority had changed him. His coat was plain, his hair damp, and no driver or security team waited nearby. Julian flexed his wrist, then looked at the shallow cut along Adrian's hand. "No. You. Nothing serious." Adrian rose without offering a hand until Julian held out his own. Their fingers met only long enough for balance. The old cedar scent reached Julian through the rain, familiar as a room he no longer lived in. His pulse remained steady. Behind them, gallery staff secured the fallen frame and cleared the glass. Adrian glanced toward the glowing entrance. "I came to see the exhibition. I can leave. You saved me. That doesn't give me a place inside." Water tapped against the arcade roof. Julian studied the man who had once run past his outstretched hand and the man now standing perfectly still, asking for nothing. "The day you chose Lucien, something in me died," Julian said. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. "For months, I thought feeling nothing meant you had emptied me out. It didn't. I still feel wonder when varnish lifts cleanly from a painting. I feel nervous before strangers see my work. I feel at home here." Through the gallery windows, 6 canvases glowed beneath soft track lights. At the center hung the man who looked past me, no longer hidden to preserve anyone else's image. Julian's gaze returned to Adrian. "What I don't feel anymore is love for you. Today, I feel gratitude. Nothing more." Adrian lowered his eyes to the rain-darkened stones. When he looked up, he gave one slow nod. "Then gratitude is more than I'm owed." He stepped aside, opening a clear path to the gallery. No plea followed. No promise disguised itself as a chain. Julian crossed the street as the rain softened to a whisper. At the doors, he glanced back once. Adrian remained beneath the arcade, one bleeding hand curled loosely at his side, but he did not follow. Julian entered alone. Warm light moved over his face, glasses chimed, voices hushed, and the scent of linen, pigment, and newly opened rooms surrounded him. Above the final canvas, the exhibition name no longer described an absence. Nothing anymore was the space left after love stopped being a prison, and Julian walked into it completely free.